Some songs become hits. These songs became warnings, revolutions, riots in rhythm.
Yes, I'm on my way.
They were banned from radio, condemned by politicians, attacked by governments, and still they spread across dance floors, protests, living rooms, and history itself. Tonight, Soul Vault dives into the records that changed music forever. Songs so powerful they frightened broadcasters, challenged authority, and forced entire generations to listen differently. From disco records accused of corrupting America, to protest anthems that shook governments, to one song so dangerous it triggered a military raid. This countdown isn't just about music. It's about what happens when rhythm becomes truth. And truth becomes impossible to silence. Stay with us because by the time we reach number 1, you'll hear the song that captured chaos so perfectly. It still sounds like the world today. Number 12, Say It Loud. I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown. A declaration with a backbeat. But the backbeat is only the surface. Listen closer and the record isn't just rhythm. It's structure under pressure. The drums don't decorate the groove. They mark territory. Each hit lands like it belongs there, like it has history behind it. There's no looseness in the intent, only precision in placement. The bass doesn't wander, doesn't improvise for attention. It locks into a pattern that feels older than the recording itself, something inherited, something remembered rather than invented. Then the horns arrive. Not as melody but as punctuation. Bright, sharp, almost metallic. They don't smooth the sound, they cut through it. And then James Brown steps forward. Not to sing, not to entertain, to initiate. Say it loud. He doesn't finish the thought, because he doesn't need to. The response comes back louder, wider, heavier. I'm black and I'm proud. And in that moment, the record stops being a performance. It becomes a system. Call, response, reinforcement. Again, and again, and again. Each repetition builds mass. Builds weight, builds presence. This is not songwriting in the traditional sense. This is construction, identity being assembled in real time. 1968 was not a quiet year. It was not a stable year. It was a year where everything felt exposed. Tension in the streets, grief in public, urgency everywhere. And into that moment comes a record that doesn't soften anything. It doesn't explain. It doesn't negotiate. It states, the genius is in its simplicity, because simplicity travels. A complicated message stays in one place. A simple one moves.
Next week, if you can, join us then. Good night.
And this one moved everywhere. Through radios, through rallies, through classrooms, through living rooms. It didn't belong to one audience. It didn't stay in one context. It became portable identity. You could take it with you. And more importantly, you could become part of it. The children's voices layered into the chorus aren't just aesthetic. They're strategic. They extend the timeline. They make the message feel like it doesn't end with one generation. Number 11, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. Question, but not a simple one. A question that doesn't arrive looking for an answer.
There's far too many.
It arrives because something has already gone wrong. Before a single lyric is delivered, the record builds a space. Not silence space. Voices drift in first. Not clear, not centered, not organized. Just fragments. Conversations overlapping. Laughter that doesn't quite settle. It sounds less like an introduction and more like you've stepped into a moment already happening. Nothing is staged. Nothing is announced.
We don't need to.
You're already inside it. Then the saxophone enters. Not sharp. Not urgent. It leans. It bends. Feels like it's thinking out loud.
What's going on? Hey, what's going on?
And that's the tone the entire record follows. Not performance, but observation in motion. When Marvin Gaye finally speaks, he doesn't project. He doesn't command. He doesn't even fully declare. He asks, "What's going on?" And the way he asks it matters. It's not frustration.
Tell me what's going on. Woo!
It's not confusion. It's not even disbelief. It's recognition. Like someone looking at the world and realizing that what they're seeing no longer matches what they were told it would be. And that realization sits quietly at first. But as the record unfolds, it expands. Because the question isn't isolated. It's connected to everything happening around it. War, protest, division, loss. Not presented as headlines, not listed as events,
Bring some understanding here today.
but felt as atmosphere. That's what makes the arrangement so precise. Nothing is forced forward. The strings don't demand attention, they hover.
Hey, what's going on? Wanna know what's going on?
Like thoughts you can't quite resolve. The percussion doesn't drive the track. It breathes, leaving room between each movement. The bass doesn't anchor aggressively. It walks steady, patient, like it's carrying weight without needing to prove it. And then there's the voice. Not singular, layered. Marvin Gaye sings with himself, one line slightly ahead, another slightly behind, overlapping just enough to feel like multiple perspectives existing at once.
What's going on?
It's not harmony in the traditional sense. It's dialogue, internal dialogue, like the same person trying to understand something from more than one angle. And that's where the record becomes something more than music. It becomes processing, because nothing in the song resolves. There's no point where everything aligns and settles. No moment where the tension clears. Instead, the record holds that tension, sustains it, allows it to exist without rushing to fix it.
Tell me, yeah, what?
And that was the risk, because music, especially at that time, was expected to deliver clarity, resolution, a clear emotional destination. But this record refuses that structure. It replaces answers with awareness. And awareness is harder to sell, harder to control, harder to package. At Motown, that difference mattered. The label was built on precision, on crafting songs that reached wide audiences without friction. This record introduced friction, not in sound but in meaning. It didn't tell listeners what to feel. It asked them to look at what they were already feeling. And that shift is what made it powerful. Because once a listener recognizes themselves inside a song, they don't just hear it, they carry it. And that's exactly what happened. What's Going On didn't explode. It didn't arrive loudly. Spread. Slowly. Steadily.
Yeah.
Through listeners who heard something in it they couldn't ignore. And over time, it changed the expectation of what soul music could hold, not just emotion. Number 10, Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. A mood but not a passing one. A mood that lingers long enough to become space. Before anything fully forms, the tempo makes a decision. It slows, not slightly, deliberately. It stretches time until each second feels like it has weight. Like it's being held in place rather than allowed to pass. And that shift matters. Because once time slows down, everything inside it becomes more noticeable.
When you're laying so close to me, there's no place I'd rather you.
The strings arrive first, but they don't announce themselves. They expand, wide, patient, almost like they're outlining the edges of a room you've just stepped into. They don't pull you forward. They surround you. Underneath, there's a pulse. Soft, steady, consistent. Not demanding attention, but impossible to ignore once you feel it. It doesn't push movement, suggests it, and then comes the voice. Donna Summer doesn't approach the track the way traditional vocalists do. She doesn't stand above it. She doesn't project over it. She moves inside it. Her voice is not just melody, it's texture. Breath becomes part of the arrangement. Proximity becomes part of the composition. And that proximity is what unsettles people. Because music, especially at the time, was expected to maintain distance. A performer here, a listener there, a clear separation. This record removes that separation, closes the gap, and once that gap closes, the experience changes. You're no longer observing the song. You're inside it. The original version doesn't rush to leave. 16 minutes. An entire side of vinyl dedicated to a single evolving state. That length isn't indulgence. It's intention. Because this record isn't built around progression in the traditional sense. It doesn't move from verse to chorus to resolution. Cycles, expands, returns, builds slowly without announcing its changes. And that structure does something important. It removes interruption. No reset, no break, just continuity. And continuity creates immersion. But immersion creates discomfort for systems that rely on control. Number 9. Let's Make a Baby by Billy Paul. A title that doesn't arrive quietly. It doesn't ease into the room. It doesn't wait to be understood. It doesn't position itself for comfort. It lands. Let's make a baby. And in that moment, before the arrangement, before the instrumentation, before a single note unfolds, the listener is already placed inside a reaction. Because the phrase removes distance. It removes metaphor. It removes the safety that suggestion usually provides. And once that safety is gone, everything that follows is heard differently. That's where the record begins. Not with sound, but with positioning. Because now the listener is not just receiving music. They are interpreting intent. And that matters. Because Philadelphia soul, at this point in time, had built its identity on something very specific. Control. Not just musical control, emotional control. Strings were arranged to feel precise, never excessive. Horns were placed to accent, never overwhelm. Vocals were delivered with elegance, never exposure. Everything lived within a boundary. Refined, balanced, measured, and that refinement created expectation. When you heard a Philadelphia record, you knew what space you were entering. But this record shifts that space without changing the structure. That's the detail that makes it powerful, because the instrumentation doesn't rebel.
Hey, don't be shy, don't be shy.
Stays disciplined. The strings still move with care. The horns still arrive exactly where they should. The rhythm section still holds everything together with quiet authority.
You'll be forevermore, forevermore.
Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. But at the center, the message refuses to stay contained. Billy Paul doesn't disguise what he's saying. He doesn't wrap it in poetic ambiguity. He doesn't soften it with distance. He delivers it directly. And that directness creates tension not in the sound, but in the listener. Because now two things are happening at once. The music is asking you to relax. The message is asking you to confront.
Let's have this, baby.
And those two instructions don't align. So the listener has to choose how to sit inside that contradiction. And that contradiction is what draws attention. Because it's unfamiliar. It disrupts expectation without disrupting structure. And disruption inside familiarity is harder to ignore than disruption alone. Public reaction follows that discomfort. Jesse Jackson steps forward and condemns it. Not quietly, publicly. And that shifts the record again. Now it's no longer just a piece of music. It becomes a point of discussion. Radio stations feel the pressure. Some adjust the presentation. They edit. They soften. They avoid saying the title out loud. Others remove it entirely. But removal doesn't erase it. It amplifies it. Because once something is restricted, it becomes something people want to understand. And understanding requires engagement. So listeners lean in, not just to hear the song, but to understand why it's causing reaction. And once that process begins, the record changes again. Now it's not just about what's being said. It's about who gets to say it. Who defines the boundary between expression and offense? Who decides when language crosses a line? And why does direct speech create more discomfort than implied meaning? Because if the same idea were wrapped in metaphor, it might pass unnoticed, but spoken plainly, it demands response. And that demand is what gives the record its weight, because it refuses to hide. It doesn't adjust its tone to ease the listener. It doesn't step back once resistance appears. Stays exactly where it is. Calm.
It dies, and it begins again.
Composed. Unmoved. And that stillness is what makes everything around it react more intensely. Because when something refuses to shift,
Let's have a baby.
everything else has to. That's why the record lasts. Not because it dominated charts. Not because it was universally accepted.
But it began.
But because it forced a conversation that didn't end when the song did. It introduced tension into a space that preferred smoothness. It brought directness into a genre known for restraint. Number 8, Jungle Fever by the Shakachas. A record with no words and still too much to say. No lyrics to quote. No verses to interpret. No message spelled out in language. And yet reaction. Because what this record does is shift the center of meaning away from words. and place it entirely inside sound and sensation. The groove arrives first. Not aggressively, not urgently. It builds itself in layers. Percussion enters in cycles. Not linear, not pushing forward, but circulating. Each element repeats, overlaps, reinforces. It creates motion without direction. You're not being led somewhere. You're being held inside a rhythm. And that difference matters. Because when music stops moving toward a destination, the listener stops anticipating what comes next and starts paying attention to what is happening now. And that's where the record gains power. Because now the smallest shift becomes noticeable. A slight change in tone, a subtle variation in timing, a sound that doesn't quite belong to the pattern. Number 7, Disco Lady by Johnny Taylor. A transition, but not the kind you notice immediately. Not a sharp turn. Not a break from one sound into another. Something quieter than that. A shift that happens underneath the surface, until suddenly you realize the ground has moved. Because by the time Disco Lady arrives, something has already begun. Soul, as it had been known, was rooted. It carried weight in its delivery, emotion that stayed close to the chest. Grooves that leaned inward rather than outward. It was music you felt before you moved to it. Disco, on the other hand, was expanding. Outward. Into larger rooms. Into longer nights. Into spaces built for motion rather than reflection. And when those two forces meet, there's tension. Because one is asking you to feel deeply. And the other is asking you to move freely. Disco Lady doesn't resolve that tension. It holds it and turns it into something usable. The groove arrives first, clean, steady, almost effortless. Not aggressive, not overwhelming, just consistent. And that consistency is important. Because it creates trust. You know where the rhythm is going. You know it's not going to break. And once that trust is established, movement becomes easier. But underneath that polish, there's still something else. Something carried over. A presence that doesn't belong entirely to disco. A certain weight in the phrasing. A texture in the delivery. Johnny Taylor doesn't abandon where he comes from. He brings it with him. And that changes how the record feels. Number 6. Shake Your Booty by KC and the Sunshine Band. A phrase that feels simple, until you stay with it long enough to realize it isn't. Shake your booty. For words. No metaphor. No build-up. No attempt to disguise intent. And because it's that direct, it does something most records avoid. It removes distance immediately. There's no interpretation phase. No moment where the listener asks, what does this mean? The instruction is clear. Shake, shake, shake. Shake, shake, shake. And clarity changes how the body responds. Because once something is understood instantly, the body doesn't wait. It reacts. The groove is built to support that reaction. Best in the world, I can tell. Yeah. It doesn't develop slowly. It locks in. Early. Firm. Consistent. Bass and percussion align in a way that feels almost mechanical, not cold but precise. Your booty, shake your booty. Every element arrives where it's expected. Nothing surprises you. And that predictability is not a limitation. It's the design. Because predictability creates stability. And stability creates freedom. When the listener knows exactly where the beat is, they don't have to search for it.
Shake, 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 shake your booty.
They don't have to think about it. They can move inside it. And that's where the record lives. Not in variation, not in complexity, but in sustained momentum.
Shake, 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 shake your.
The repetition isn't there because there's nothing else to say. It's there because repetition reinforces action. Each time the phrase returns, it lands heavier.
Shake, shake, yeah.
Not because it changes, but because the listener has already begun responding to it. And response builds on itself. Movement leads to more movement.
Shake, shake.
Energy feeds energy. And before the record even reaches its midpoint, the listener is no longer passive. They're participating. That's the shift.
Shake your booty. Shake your booty.
Because once a song moves from something you hear to something you do, it changes its role completely. Stops being entertainment. It becomes function.
Shake, 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 shake your booty.
But outside that space, the reaction takes a different shape. Because what feels natural on the dance floor can feel threatening in controlled environments.
Shake, shake, come on, shake it, shake, shake.
A single word becomes the focus. Booty. And suddenly the conversation shifts. Not about rhythm, not about structure, about appropriateness.
Shake your booty, shake, shake, shake.
Number 5. The revolution will not be televised by Gil Scott-Heron. No melody to guide you. No chorus to return to.
Able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be.
No familiar structure to settle into. Just a voice, and the weight of what it's carrying. Instead of overwhelming the listener, it sharpens their focus. Because the delivery is controlled.
Jackie Onassis blowing her nose. The theme song will not be.
Number 4. If There's a Hell Below, We're All Going to Go by Curtis Mayfield. No introduction. No easing into the atmosphere. No attempt to soften the landing.
Keep talking about your worry.
The record arrives already burning. Before the groove fully settles, tension is already present. Bass drops low and heavy, not just heard but felt, thick enough to change the temperature of the room.
Everybody's slaying.
Percussion enters behind it with restless momentum, pushing forward like something trying to outrun collapse. The guitars don't glide. They distort at the edges,
We say don't worry.
roughening the sound instead of polishing it. Even before the lyrics begin, the music tells you something important. This is not escape. This is confrontation.
And if there's hell below,
And then Curtis Mayfield steps into the center of it. Not loudly, not dramatically, almost calmly, which somehow makes the message hit harder.
we're all gonna go.
Because calmness in the middle of chaos carries a different kind of authority. It suggests clarity. It suggests someone who has already looked directly at what others are still trying to avoid.
It's true. This ain't no way at all.
And what Mayfield sees, he names. Not symbolically, not vaguely, directly. Racism, violence, corruption,
We say don't worry.
hatred, social decay. The title alone removes all distance. If there's a hell below, we're all going to go. Not some people. Not them. All.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's what gives the record its weight. Because it refuses separation. It refuses the comforting idea that collapse only belongs to certain communities, certain neighborhoods, certain people. Number 3, War by Edwin Starr. Some songs arrive gradually. This one detonates. No mystery. No atmosphere to settle into.
Mr. Edwin Starr!
No poetic ambiguity hiding the message. Just a word. War. And then the question comes immediately behind it. What is it good for? There's barely enough time to process the setup before the answer crashes through. Absolutely nothing. Not softened. Not qualified. Not explained. Delivered with the force of someone who is no longer interested in diplomacy. And that force changes everything about the record. Because from the very beginning, this song rejects subtlety as a strategy. The drums hit hard and direct, almost militaristic in their impact. Horns stab through the arrangement like alarms cutting across noise. The groove doesn't glide, it marches. Every element inside the production feels built for confrontation. And then there's Edwin Starr himself. He doesn't sing this record so much as drive himself through it. His voice strains, cracks, pushes past smoothness into urgency. You can hear the physical pressure in the delivery. Like the words are too heavy to sit comfortably inside melody alone. That matters, because the song isn't trying to sound polished. It's trying to sound necessary. Originally, the record wasn't even meant to become this explosive. The Temptations recorded an earlier version, but Motown hesitated. The message felt dangerous. Too direct. Too confrontational for a label built on crossover appeal and controlled presentation. But once Edwin Starr took hold of it, hesitation disappeared. Because Starr removes any remaining distance between the listener and the message. He doesn't perform opposition, he embodies it, and timing intensified everything. The Vietnam War was no longer distant background noise. Casualties were visible. Television brought images of conflict directly into American homes. Young people faced the possibility of being drafted into violence they increasingly questioned and distrusted. The national mood had changed. Patriotism no longer felt uncomplicated. Number 2, Zombie by Fela Kuti. Not every protest song receives backlash. Some receive retaliation. Zombie doesn't sound afraid from the beginning. It sounds deliberate. The groove forms slowly, patiently, almost methodically. Percussion layers interlock with mechanical precision. Guitars cycle through sharp rhythmic patterns while horns rise and fall like commands being issued across distance. Everything about the arrangement feels structured, disciplined, controlled. And that is exactly the point. Because Fela Kuti is building a musical mirror. A groove designed to resemble military obedience before he tears that obedience apart from the inside. Zombie. The word lands repeatedly throughout the song, not casually but mockingly. A soldier reduced to automatic response. A body trained to obey without reflection. Movement without thought. Action without conscience. Go and kill. Go and die. Commands repeated until individuality disappears entirely. And what makes the song so dangerous is that Fela never hides the target. No coded metaphors. No safe distance. The criticism is direct, public, unmistakable. By the mid-1970s, Fela had already transformed Afrobeat into more than music. From Lagos, he built an entire cultural and political force around sound. Number 1, Ball of Confusion. That's what the world is today. The Temptations. A song that never settles. From the opening seconds, everything feels unstable. Bass pulses beneath the surface with nervous energy. Percussion drives forward without allowing space to breathe. Guitars flicker in and out like signals cutting through static. The arrangement feels crowded before the lyrics even begin. And once the vocals enter, the pressure multiplies. Issue after issue arrives in rapid succession. War, racism, political corruption, economic anxiety, environmental collapse, fear spreading faster than understanding. There's no narrative arc guiding the listener through it. No central story. No emotional resolution waiting at the end. Just accumulation. Information stacked on top of information until the listener feels overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it. And that design is intentional, because the song isn't describing confusion. It's recreating it. The Temptations had built their legacy on precision. Harmonies polished to near perfection. Performances balancing emotional depth with accessibility. Much of Motown operated the same way. Smooth presentation, carefully structured crossover appeal, emotional clarity. Ball of Confusion breaks that clarity apart.